Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, and now we go to the UN session live to see the latest developments. The General Assembly to the General Assembly 79th plenary meeting, the 80th session, use of the veto item 64 special report for the Security Council A80/707. This UN session is going to be live.
The opportunity and the responsibility to ensure that the debate on the freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz does not end with the casting of a veto. Member States likewise have the opportunity to speak out on the ongoing conflict and the situation in the Middle East more broadly, to hold the Security Council accountable and, importantly, to remind all parties involved of the obligations under the UN Charter and international law. Because every resolution not passed in the name of peace and security, and every violation of international law, carries real consequences. Consequences for people on the ground and for the countries and communities affected. And as the past weeks have made clear, in our interconnected world, there's nothing theoretical about compliance with international law. What unfolds in one region echoes across all others, with deep and multi-sistered consequences everywhere. Oil prices have surged by more than 40%, rising to around $100 per barrel, with spikes above $110. Disruptions linked to the conflict have removed up to 1.5 million barrels per day from global supply, driving sharp increases in fuel, transport, and broader trade costs. The disruption of fertilizers has exacerbated food insecurity for millions of vulnerable people. The IMF cut its growth outlook for 2026, noting the threat of global recession. The economic repercussions are felt everywhere. For example, as far away as New Zealand, where airlines have been forced to slash services, and the Philippines, which had even declared an energy emergency. Yet while the veto resolution focused on the Strait of Hormuz, what we are witnessing is not a single crisis, but the convergence of multiple overlapping and long-standing fault lines, which did not start on the 28th of February. It includes attacks against civilian and commercial infrastructure, from oil and energy systems to airports to vessels and shipping containers, to most shockingly schools and communities. Attacks that are prohibited under international humanitarian law, which protects civilians. It includes tensions over Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile programs. It includes grave human rights violations, most notably the killing of thousands of peaceful protesters in Iran. It includes the persistent threats, including missile attacks against Israel. It includes the deaths of thousands of civilians, including children, in Iran and Lebanon, as well as missile attacks and casualties across the region, in Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, Jordan, and Iraq. And it includes the diversion of international attention from the ongoing catastrophic humanitarian situation in Gaza, and the need to fully implement Security Council Resolution 2803, as well as from negative developments in the West Bank, where we continue to see intensified settler violence against Palestinians and the expansion of illegal settlements by Israel. Taken together, the Excellencies, these realities cannot be ignored, nor can they be separated. They form the broader context within which this current crisis is unfolding. Now, more than ever, dear colleagues, there is a need to refocus our efforts on diplomacy, on negotiations, and on the peaceful settlement of all disputes in the Middle East, in full accordance with the UN Charter and international law. It is there for a reason. In this regard, I commend all parties who have continued to pursue diplomatic solutions, including those efforts that had helped to broker the initial ceasefire between the United States and Iran, which must be respected by all parties and extended throughout the region, including in Lebanon. Indeed, if the Security Council is unable or unwilling to fulfill its Charter responsibility in the maintenance of international peace and security, then the General Assembly, us, you, must step forward. We must then move from debate to action. I therefore encourage all Member States to put forward concrete, forward-looking solutions, including draft resolutions, that help move beyond the current impasse, not only with regard to the Strait of Hormuz, but across the region as a whole. Knowing what a difficult, fragmented time we live in, and fully aware of what might yet come, we should not reduce diplomatic engagement, but rather seize the opportunity to build on the initial fragile ceasefire, including through the efforts of the newly appointed personal envoy of the Secretary General on the Middle East. History has shown us time and again that pursuing diplomacy and upholding international law remain the only viable path to peace and security and the protection of civilians and human dignity, no matter how hard it may seem. And as I said in the beginning, in an interconnected world, it is in the interest of all of us to stand up and protect the international rules-based order, as the consequences of a crisis anywhere affect us everywhere. I thank you. Before proceeding further, I wish to recall my letter on the time management and speaking times circulated to delegations on January 6, 2026. During this debate, speakers are encouraged to adhere to the time limit of 7 minutes for statements made on behalf of a group of states and 5 minutes for delegations speaking in their national capacity. To assist delegations in managing their time, a countdown clock will be displayed on the screens. I thank you for your cooperation. As the first speaker, I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation, followed by China.
Madam President, on the 7th of April, the Russian Federation voted against the draft submitted by Bahrain, Jordan, Qatar, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates and the Saudi Arabia, the draft resolution of the United Nations Security Council on the situation in the Strait of Hormuz and the waters adjacent to it. But first of all, we would like to recall the principled position of the Russian Federation with regard to the conflict in the Middle East. Our country condemns the aggression of the United States and Israel against Iran, which was unleashed in violation of the UN Charter and other norms of international law, and which resulted in a large number of victims, including amongst the civilians. We are committed to the sovereignty and territorial integrity of all, without exception, states of the region, both Iran and the Arabian Peninsula monarchies. For this reason, we consider strikes against civilians and civilian infrastructure to be unacceptable. The leadership of our country undertook the most active efforts possible with a view to preventing them. However, some members of the Security Council prefer to turn a blind eye to the root cause of the escalation of tensions. Unfortunately, this was one of the key shortcomings of the earlier Security Council resolution number 2817. Nonetheless, Russia, understanding the concern of its partners of the GCC countries, abstained during that vote. However, in the draft Security Council resolution on maritime security in the Middle East that we are discussing today, not only was the broad context of the conflict ignored, in it the Security Council was being invited to give a green light to the use of certain protective measures under the pretext of ensuring the safety of navigation. This would have become a carte blanche for the continuation of aggressive actions and further escalation. The removal of references to Chapter 7 of the UN Charter and to the mentioning of all necessary measures did not solve this problem. In addition to this, essentially every paragraph of the draft resolution was replete with confrontational and factually incorrect elements, which is something that we spoke about in detail in the statement we made in explanation of the vote on the 7th of April. The adoption of such a document would only have created an additional pretext for aggressors who were already subjecting Iran's civilian infrastructure and civilians to massive strikes. Enshrining the possibility of using force on the basis of vague criteria, accompanied by an attempt to create the impression of Iran as the sole source of threats to international peace and security, left ample room for interpretation by some states and for legitimizing unlawful and dangerous actions. In the very recent past, we have already seen such an example, and everyone can recall what monstrous consequences the broad interpretation of Security Council Resolution 1973 on Libya, adopted in 2011, led to. The Russian Federation could not allow the Security Council to sign up to the legitimization of aggression. For this reason, throughout the entire negotiating process and up to the very last moment, we kept calling on our Arab friends to refrain from advancing this draft resolution. Unfortunately, our Bahraini colleagues and their like-minded partners nevertheless decided to bring the matter to a vote. In that situation, we had no choice but to oppose its adoption. China acted in a similar manner. The events that followed it once again confirmed that our countries, as responsible permanent members of the Security Council, took the right decision. Shortly after the vote on the 7th of April, the establishment of a ceasefire regime between the United States and Iran was announced, and on the 11th of April in Islamabad, direct talks were held between high-level American and Iranian representatives. We are convinced that preventing short-sighted and ill-considered steps within the Security Council made it possible to safeguard the necessary condition to achieve the first, although minimal and very fragile, agreements, as well as for launching a diplomatic process for a comprehensive settlement. Madam President, the Russian Federation stands for ensuring the freedom of navigation, and not only in the Strait of Hormuz and adjacent waters, but throughout the world ocean. We consider it necessary to seek an end to attacks on the commercial fleet of any states, as well as the opening of corridors for Cuba and Venezuela. This problem must be addressed in a comprehensive manner with the participation of all interested states. We are convinced that such an approach should be fully applied to the current situation in the Middle East as well. Resolving the problem of the Strait of Hormuz, aggravated by the escalatory steps of the American leadership to block maritime communication with Iranian ports, is impossible without eliminating the root causes of the current crisis and without taking into account the opinion of Tehran. At the same time, understanding the concerns of our Arab friends, and Russia, jointly with China, put forward an alternative draft Security Council resolution on the current situation in the Middle East, including in the context of maritime security. This draft is framed in a concise and balanced manner and is aimed at facilitating the search for a negotiated solution, which is currently being pursued with the assistance of a number of countries, including Pakistan. The document is currently in blue. at the Security Council table. We believe that at the present moment, the Council should focus precisely on such objective initiatives that are consistent with its mandate to maintain international peace and security, and we count on the support of all members of the Security Council. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Russian Federation. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of China, followed by Kuwait and the European Union.
Madam President, on April the 7th, China, along with Russia, voted against a draft resolution on the issue of the Strait of Hormuz at the Security Council. As a permanent member of the Security Council, China approaches every vote in the Council with a serious, conscientious, and responsible attitude, and always determines its voting position based on the merits of the issue itself and on whether the adoption of a resolution would genuinely contribute to resolving the issue and achieving peace. China attaches great importance to this draft resolution submitted by Bahrain on behalf of the Gulf states. We fully understand their major concerns. At the same time, the Security Council's actions should be aimed at de-escalation. They must not provide a veneer of legitimacy for unauthorized military operations or grant a license to the use of force, let alone further exacerbate tension and add fuel to the fire, thereby leading to an escalation of the conflict. In exercising its veto on this draft resolution, China has upheld international fairness and justice, defended the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, prevented the conflict from expanding further and the situation from escalating further, and created favorable conditions for achieving a temporary ceasefire and launching dialogue and negotiation. China's vote represents a choice responsible for peace and for the people of the region. It stands on the right side of history and will stand the test of history. President, China does not go along with Iran's attacks on Gulf states. China believes that the passage and safety of a strait used for international navigation should be safeguarded. We call on Iran to take proactive measures to restore normal navigation in the Strait of Hormuz at an early date. Meanwhile, the US's ramped-up military deployment and targeted blockade constitute a dangerous and irresponsible move. The issue of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz is a spillover effect of the conflict in Iran. Only a complete ceasefire can fundamentally create conditions for easing the situation. China welcomes the announcement by the relevant parties that a ceasefire agreement has been reached. We support all efforts conducive to ending the conflict. The US-Iran negotiation in Pakistan marks a step in the right direction toward de-escalation. The current situation has reached a critical juncture between war and peace, and a window of opportunity for peace is opening. The pressing priority is to prevent, by all means, a relapse in fighting, and to maintain the momentum of the ceasefire negotiation that did not come easy. This serves the fundamental interests of the people in the region and meets the shared aspirations of the international community. The relevant parties should adhere to the ceasefire agreement, stick to the direction of dialogue and peace talks, stay committed to resolving disputes through political and diplomatic means, and take concrete actions to ease regional tension. The international community should continue to intensify efforts to promote talks for peace and unequivocally oppose any actions that undermine the ceasefire or escalate confrontation. All parties should also earnestly respect Lebanon's sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity and prevent the escalation of the situation in Lebanon from affecting the ceasefire agreement. President, as a sincere friend and strategic partner of the countries in the Middle East, China is following closely the regional situation, upholds an objective and impartial position, and has been engaging in intensive mediation with all parties to actively promote talks for peace. Recently, President Xi Jinping solemnly put forward 4 propositions on safeguarding and promoting peace and stability in the Middle East. namely staying committed to the principle of peaceful coexistence, staying committed to the principle of national sovereignty, staying committed to the principle of the international rule of law, and staying committed to a balanced approach to development and security. This demonstrates China's consistent position and active efforts to promote peace and conflicts and advocate for dialogue to resolve differences. It offers a Chinese approach to resolving the crisis and ending the conflict. Guided by the essence of President Xi Jinping's 4 propositions, China stands ready to continue to facilitate de-escalation, promote the improvement of relations among regional countries, and play a constructive role in ultimately achieving enduring peace and stability in the Middle East. Thank you, President.
I thank the distinguished representative of China. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kuwait, also on behalf of Bahrain, Jordan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates.
In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. Madam President, on behalf of the Kingdom of Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the State of Qatar, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, and my country, the State of Kuwait, I express our appreciation for holding this meeting pursuant to General Assembly Resolution 76/262, following the initiative led by Liechtenstein with broad support from member states. This initiative reflects the commitment of the international community to transparency and accountability when the Security Council is unable to discharge its responsibilities due to the use of the veto. Madam President, the draft resolution on securing maritime navigation in the Strait of Hormuz was tabled on the 7th of April 2026 as part of a responsible and purposeful collective action aimed at addressing a clear and direct threat to international peace and security, and aimed at safeguarding the freedom of maritime navigation as a shared international interest. This endeavor reflected our country's commitment to act within relevant multilateral frameworks, foremost among them the Security Council, in order for the Council to fulfill its core responsibilities in confronting such threats and unjustified and unlawful practices that target the stability of the region and the global economy. The Kingdom of Bahrain, in its capacity as penholder, made diligent efforts during extensive consultations with members of the Security Council that lasted nearly 3 weeks to reach a balanced text that takes into account all concerns, in particular those of the countries of the region. These efforts included extensive consultations and the circulation of 6 successive versions of the draft resolution. The vote was postponed on more than one occasion in an effort to ensure the unity of the Council on this important matter. Several proposals were tabled to find common ground. Nevertheless, the Security Council was unable to discharge its responsibility and adopt the draft resolution, despite the gravity of the existing threat and its direct impact on international peace and security. Madam President, through Security Council Resolution 2817, which was co-sponsored by 136 states, the international community has adopted obligations that are not subject to sundry interpretations or selective implementation. Any failure to implement these obligations or any laxity in enforcing them encourages further violations in blatant defiance of this consensus, and this would be a real test of the credibility of the international system. The illegal measures taken by Iran in the Strait of Hormuz have constituted a direct threat to global energy security and the safety of supply chains. When international maritime routes are threatened, the entire world is affected by the repercussions. They impact the lives of millions in the region and around the world. And it is the global south that bears the greatest burden of such crises. The World Food Programme has estimated that continued disruptions could push up to 45 million additional people into acute food insecurity. This is not a new matter. This is a pattern of behavior that we have seen before. Security Council Resolution 552 of 1984 expressed international concern regarding such practices. Madam President, these attacks by the Islamic Republic of Iran have not only targeted shipping lanes, but have also affected civilian facilities and critical infrastructure in clear and blatant violation of international law and international humanitarian law, as well as the rules of freedom of navigation enshrined in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. Such practices cannot be justified under any pretext, and they are imprescriptible. Rather, they require a firm and responsible international stance. This collective action reflected a necessary response to grave developments that created a direct threat to freedom of maritime navigation and affected the safety and stability of international trade, energy markets, and the supply of food and medicine. The draft resolution also aimed to consolidate relevant principles of international law on freedom of navigation and aimed to ensure that waterways are not used as tools of pressure or extortion. The failure by the Security Council to adopt it does not absolve any party of responsibility, but it does send an erroneous message to the peoples of the world that threats to international waterways can occur without a firm collective response by the international body responsible for the maintenance of international peace and security. Madam President, the Gulf region is not distant from the countries of the world. Rather, it lies at the heart of the global economic stability. Its security is an integral part of the security of all states, and its stability is a cornerstone of prosperity for the world as a whole. We are aware of the seriousness of existing threats, and we are committed to safeguarding maritime security and ensuring the continuity of international trade. Our countries, therefore, wish to announce their intention collectively to continue working and coordinating closely with Member States with a view to submitting a new draft resolution aimed at securing the freedom of maritime navigation. This effort will be based on a comprehensive, consultative approach that takes into account all concerns, thereby enhancing the prospects of achieving broad international consensus and reaffirming the principles of international law applicable to straits used for international navigation in order to protect freedom of navigation, safeguard maritime security, and ensure full compliance with Security Council resolutions 552 and 2817. At the same time, we affirm that the right of our countries to defend their security and sovereignty remains guaranteed under Article 51 of the Charter of the United Nations to address any ongoing threats. Madam President, the credibility of the international system is measured by its unity and its ability to implement its resolutions on the ground. Today, that credibility stands before a real test. We will continue to uphold our responsibility alongside all those who believe in international law and in the right of peoples to security, stability, and a life of dignity. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Kuwait on behalf of Bahrain, Jordan, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the European Union on behalf of the EU and its member states, followed by Singapore and Iceland.
Thank you, Madam President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the European Union and its member states. The candidate countries North Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Ukraine, the Republic of Moldova and Bosnia and Herzegovina, as well as Andorra and Monaco, aligned themselves with this statement. We regret that despite intense negotiations, the draft resolution proposed by Bahrain on behalf of Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, the UAE and Jordan could not be adopted because of the veto exercised by two permanent members of the Security Council, the body bearing the primary responsibility for maintaining peace and security. Freedom of navigation and maritime security in the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical maritime routes, are essential for the stability of the Middle East, for global trade, for energy and food security, and for other critical supply chains. As we are witnessing today, disruption to its normal functioning carries far-reaching consequences as the security, economic and humanitarian aspects of the crisis spill far beyond the Gulf region. For example, since the onset of the escalation, fertilizer prices increased by 20 to 35% in Latin America and the Caribbean, and global urea prices are up 50% just as Asia enters its rice planting season. This threatens to reduce harvest globally and could drive up to 45 million additional people, as the previous statement indicated, into acute hunger during 2026. This is a global crisis and the most significant humanitarian supply chain disruption since COVID, comparable to the shock caused by Russia's blockade of the Black Sea and the subsequent grain crisis. Any act that threatens safe and free navigation through the Strait of Hormuz is unacceptable. Maritime security, freedom of navigation, and the right of safe free passage through international straits must be respected in line with international law as reflected in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. It cannot be conditioned by individual states. The European Union welcomes the ceasefire agreed by the United States and Iran and urges for de-escalation and continued dialogue and full respect of international law by all parties, including the principles of the United Nations Charter and international humanitarian law. We commend Pakistan and other regional partners for their efforts and mediation that contributed to this positive outcome. Madam President, we welcome increased coordination among partners to ensure freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz and to consider appropriate measures once the conditions are met. We also welcome the Secretary General's personal engagement in addressing this crisis, including through the appointment of Jean Arnaud as personal envoy for the Middle East, and express our full support for his mandate, as well as for the UN task force set up by, with the aim to develop mechanisms designed to meet humanitarian needs in the Strait of Hormuz. We urge all involved to fully respect the ceasefire across the region, including in Lebanon, cease all military operations, and fully ensure freedom of navigation in line with international law, with special urgency on the passage of humanitarian goods. UNSC Resolution 2817 should be fully implemented. All parties must comply with international humanitarian law and protect civilians and civilian infrastructure, UN peacekeepers, and humanitarian personnel. In this context, we further call for an urgent cessation of hostilities in Lebanon, which take a heavy toll on civilians. We hope that the first bilateral meeting in decades between Israel and Lebanon may pave the way to a lasting peace between the two countries. To conclude, Madam President, the European Union will continue to engage with partners in the region to contribute to de-escalation and regional stability. Diplomacy is key to resolving all outstanding issues. European Union's High Representative, Kallas, visited the Gulf countries last week, while the President of the European Council, Costa, concluded his visit to the Gulf region yesterday. Parties should continue engaging in good faith in efforts to reach a sustainable agreement on all areas of concern. We stand ready to contribute to all diplomatic efforts in coordination with partners to reduce tensions and to bring about a lasting solution to end the hostilities, prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, and put an end to Iran's destabilizing activities, including its ballistic missile program. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the distinguished representative of the European Union on behalf of the EU and its member states. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Singapore, also on behalf of Fiji, Malta and Jamaica.
Madam President, it is my honor to deliver the following statement on behalf of Fiji, Jamaica, Malta and my own country, Singapore. Our 4 countries contributed actively to the negotiation, drafting and conclusion of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS. We remain steadfast stewards of the Convention, committed to upholding it as the legal framework within which all activities in the oceans and seas must be carried out. For small states, the international rule of law is a matter of survival. We therefore have an abiding interest in the faithful implementation of UNCLOS as the constitution for the oceans and in reaffirming its universal and unified character. Madam President, at the outset, we wish to express our gratitude to you for convening this debate on the use of the veto. The membership is gathered here today because the veto was exercised to block a draft resolution concerning the Strait of Hormuz. We are disappointed that there could be no agreement on the adoption of the draft resolution, which would have reaffirmed that all ships and aircraft enjoy the right of transit passage through the strait, which shall not be impeded in accordance with international law as reflected in UNCLOS. The Strait of Hormuz is a strait used for international navigation, through which the right of transit passage applies under UNCLOS. This right is also firmly entrenched in customary international law, and it is therefore binding on all states, regardless of whether they are parties to UNCLOS. Transit passage applies during peacetime and war. This right is not contingent on any license or levy. It is an inherent right of ships and aircraft to traverse without prior authorization. As reflected in Article 44 of UNCLOS, the rule is unequivocal that states bordering such straits shall not hamper or suspend transit passage. There are no exceptions to this inherent right. The right of unimpeded transit passage has been and continues to be of fundamental importance to international maritime trade. When transit passage is disrupted, the consequences reverberate across the global economy through energy markets, supply chains, and increased freight costs. For many small island nations and developing states with import-dependent economies, such disruptions have severe impacts on economic